end of Adventure Time's 7th season, the show was on more of a roll than perhaps ever before. In back-to-back episodes, we had Crossover and the Hall of Egress, both episodes that I've talked about before on this channel, and both episodes that are some of the best to ever come out of the series. But in order for these Finn-focused outings to become a terrific trilogy, the next episode also needed to flash a light on the series' protagonists like never before. And luckily, Flute Spell was more than up to the task, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. In this video, we're going to dive into the episode and talk about how it utilizes Finn and Huntress Wizard's relationship in order to discuss the often ephemeral nature of attraction.
Mars is in a coma and she might not wake up.
I'm glad you got a friend now, even though that's messed up.
After the first reference to the game that Jake is playing on BMO, Age of Grinders, a game that's symbolic meaning is revealed when we cycle back to it at the end of the episode, we also get the main song of this very musical episode, being the simple but catchy My Name is Jake. Besides just being a banger with some fun callbacks to past storylines and such, the song also works to first establish the ultimate theme of the episode, but in a really interesting way, where we actually get the counter argument first. Once we get to Finn and Huntress Wizard, the episode begins to argue about the ability of relationships to hinder one's potential, but here, Jake's song clearly implies the opposite, as he happily lives his life surrounded by his friends and family. Whereas the spirit of the forest will eventually tell the audience that attracting forces come and go, this montage is filled with relationships that Jake has had for as long as the series covers, and it becomes clear how dependent Jake's enjoyment of life is on those around him. This viewpoint is immediately countered in the episode by the reemergence of Science Cat after 6 seasons. If you don't remember, which is completely expected if you're not an Adventure Time sicko, Science Cat is from the 9th episode of the series, My Two Favorite People, in which he and his buddy Shark fight Finn, a fight in which Jake ultimately chooses not to participate in because of his commitment with Lady Rainicorn, which immediately brings back the idea of Jake's relationships hindering his potential in the minds of the very few fans who could link all of this together while watching the episode. A much less subtle indicator of this is Science Cat's announcement, being that Shark passed away of old age at some point in the last 7 seasons, and thus their relationship has obviously ceased, giving some more foreshadowing of Huntress Wizard's thoughts at the end of the episode. Speaking of which, on a tip from Shelby, Jake ventures out to find Finn, who has reportedly been hanging out with a new lady, and he eventually finds him playing his flute with Huntress Wizard in the treetops, which ultimately gives us the first of many atmospheric shots in this episode. HW murmurs in frustration as she hops to the ground, which Jake, who just showed up, interprets as her breaking up with Finn. As established in the first 3 minutes of the episode, Jake values relationships so much that watching one end that he didn't even know existed immediately causes him to break down. Finn quickly calms his brother down with the explanation that the pair was never dating and that he's just trying to play his flute to help her reconnect with the spirit of the forest, another example in this episode of a relationship that has seemingly drifted away. The flashback with Huntress Wizard confronting Finn and threatening to shoot an arrow up his nose is pretty hilarious too, but moving on. Jake obviously doesn't accept that Finn is doing all of this without trying to pursue a relationship with HW, and thus decides to be his wingman for the rest of the episode, as Huntress Wizard tells Finn that they need to make a new flute out of the tusk of a thunderboar before taking them back to her place to rest before the hunt in the morning. Jake throughout these scenes can admittedly be a bit annoying if you aren't a huge fan of his antics, but the hilarity of HW's living situation should ultimately get you through it while he slowly gets Finn to show more and more signs of being somewhat attracted to Huntress Wizard. Ironically, it's after Finn and Jake wake up that we get to the dream sequence of this episode, as Finn drinks some water in an attempt to gain electricity immunity at the cost of some, quote, crazy dreams. This dream, besides having some of the wackiest visuals in the show, also comes jam-packed with symbolism in typical Adventure Time dream fashion, with the first one being the wolf that Huntress Wizard transforms into. While I would have loved to dive into what I think this choice of animal means, the spirit of the forest actually just tells the audience everything they're supposed to get from this transformation, being HW's tendency to only look forward, just like a wolf. When Finn asks the spirit for immunity to electricity, the scene immediately switches to become much more intense, as Finn's sword appears in Finn's arms, aimed at his chest. Finn obviously freaks out as the spirit explains that he must plunge his sword into his heart to achieve the powers he's looking for. In order for Finn to achieve his goals, or as Huntress Wizard puts it at the end of the episode, become an exceptional beast, he has to purge his heart, or the part of him that forms relationships with those around him. As Finn is faced with the choice of failing Huntress Wizard or plunging his sword into his chest, the music becomes louder and louder before ultimately, without much deliberation, Finn chooses to do it, as the dream ends and Finn obtains what he was looking for.
Yeah, feels fine.
Great. Now we can hunt down the Thunderboar.
After being faced with the fact that he was completely willing to stab himself for her, Finn begins to accept that he's probably at least a little bit attracted to Huntress Wizard, something that becomes apparent as he becomes pretty nervous around her from this point on, and gets frustrated when Jake jokes around about it. The trio hunt down and take the horn from the boar, which HW forms into a new flute for Finn. But once again, when Finn plays the flute, Huntress Wizard watches impatiently as nothing happens, as she tells him that they should just give up. Of course, Jake, being the perfect wingman he is, refuses to let this interaction between the pair end, and thus suggests that they start playing together in harmony, suggesting that that might be what's missing. Jake obviously doesn't really believe this is gonna work, but when the pair tries it, the spirit himself actually ends up showing up. But it's not simply playing together that caused him to appear, it's the fact that Finn finally started playing his flute for what he actually wanted, as he admits to playing for Huntress Wizard, but he accepts that she has stuff going on with the spirit of the forest. After being seemingly initially shocked by this admission, HW begins to romanticize her lack of comfort, and admits to Finn, through a kiss, that while her titular flute spell was for him too, that she believes that exceptional beasts like her and Finn aren't meant to fall in love, or they'll lose what made them exceptional in the first place. Both Finn and Jake are stunned by HW's speech here, as the latter reveals his immediate, obvious disagreement with it, as evidenced by his song earlier in the episode. Finn, however, just says that he agrees. Not necessarily with HW or with Jake, almost as if he agrees with both of them, as he looks around, takes in his surroundings, and bids farewell to Huntress Wizard, returning to the treehouse to play some Age of Grinders, as the game's symbolic meaning as a representation of life becomes fairly apparent. Jake begins to comment on the game being about taking each challenge that comes at you one at a time, speaking in vague enough terms to make a deeper meaning obvious, as he begins to apologize to Finn about things with Huntress Wizard not working out, and Finn responds by echoing the statements of the spirit of the forest earlier in the episode.
Attracting forces come and go, man.
As I mentioned throughout this analysis, one of my favorite things about this overall terrific episode is its ability to showcase both sides of the argument through Huntress Wizard and Jake having different takes on the effect of relationships, especially romantic, on one's ability to, as HW put it, matter in the world. To Jake, it's his relationships with his friends and family that give his life meaning, and without them, he feels completely purposeless. To Huntress Wizard, it's her journey to try and achieve her goals that gives her life meaning, and any relationships she has will just fade away, ultimately resulting in her coming out of them with nothing but wasted time. Just like many other episodes in the show, as the show was made by artists, I think this struggle can also be applied to the idea of creating art as well, as the idea of the loneliest artists making the most impactful art resonates throughout this episode. While there are obviously exceptions to the rule, so many artists seem to lose their edge as their life stabilizes as a result of the success of their seminal work, and that's exactly what Huntress Wizard is afraid will happen if she gets too comfortable. She's afraid of how her life may change if she abandons her ways of solitude, and thus rejects Finn despite their mutual attraction, while Jake scoffs at the idea of the abandonment of what he thinks could be a good relationship. And as this tension between both of these ideas climax, Finn seemingly agrees with both. And while it seems initially that these ideas contrast too much to be mutually compatible, I think Finn is realizing here that Huntress Wizard and Jake are at two different stages of their life, and thus have different outlooks. While Finn and Jake are close in chronological age, and Huntress Wizard is likely much older, Finn is definitely closer to her in maturity, and thus it makes sense that he would gravitate towards her belief of wanting to experience some self-discovery instead of just aimlessly going through the motions of a relationship, while Jake would would be more attracted to the idea of being happily settled down. Besides a kiss with Huntress Wizard and the season 10 premiere Wild Hunt, which is pretty clearly more about Finn's guilty conscience regarding Fern and less about romance, Finn's romantic life in the series pretty much ends in this episode. While this may change if we ever see the middle of Finn's life, it appears that he has decided, at least for now, that it's best if he stopped pursuing romantic endeavors, accepted that attracting forces come and go, and focused on being, as Huntress Wizard refers to him as, an exceptional beast with great hair. Anyway, that's gonna be about it for me. As you can probably tell, I'm starting to kind of get in a groove with these videos breaking down Adventure Time episodes, so if you have an idea of one that deserves this kind of thematic breakdown, please leave a comment. On the Hall of Egress video, a bunch of you left some of your favorite episodes down below, and I noted every one, including Flute Spell, so they really do help. If you want to see what I'm working on next, you can find me on Twitter, where I spew all of my bad takes on animation that don't make it into videos. Either way, this has been AmpleSamuel, and I'll see you in a week or so with a longer, less analytical video. Thanks for watching.